Camila held the envelope like it might explode. The return address read Frecuencia Latina in bold letters, with the television network's logo printed in the corner. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. The letter congratulated her on being selected to participate in their groundbreaking new show, El Valor de la Verdad. 15,000 souls. Even the lowest tier would pay more than she made in 6 months at the call center where her parents thought she worked. Her mother was hanging laundry in the courtyard when Camila burst through the kitchen door, waving the letter. Mrs. Ramos dropped a wet shirt back into the basket. Her face went pale. Camila explained about the game show, about the money, about the opportunity. Her mother picked up the shirt again, shaking it out with more force than necessary. She hung it on the line with deliberate precision. Each clothespin snapped into place like a judgment. Mrs. Ramos stared at her daughter for a long moment. Then she turned back to the laundry basket without a word. Diego was waiting for her outside the textile factory. They sat on a concrete barrier, sharing a bottle of Inca Cola while buses rumbled past, spewing exhaust into the evening air. She told him about the show. His frown deepened with each detail. He had heard of it, the one with personal questions, intimate revelations, public humiliation disguised as entertainment. She insisted she had nothing to hide. He finished his soda and crushed the can between his hands. The sound echoed off the factory walls. She pulled out the letter and handed it to him. His expression grew darker with each paragraph. He pointed to the part about polygraph testing. His finger tapped the paper twice. He looked at her like she was a stranger, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time and didn't recognize what he found. She took the letter back and folded it away. The bus arrived with a wheeze of air brakes. Camila stood and kissed Diego on the cheek, tasting salt and worry on his skin. As the bus pulled away, she saw him in the window's reflection, still crushing the empty can in his hands. About 6 weeks earlier, Camila had seen the casting call on a torn flyer outside the unemployment office. Bold red letters asked if she had the courage to tell the truth. The promise was 50,000 souls for honesty. She had filled out the application during her lunch break at a McDonald's with a borrowed pen. The questions started simple: name, age, occupation, family status. Then they grew more probing. The most shameful thing she had ever done, what secret would destroy her family, how far she would go for money. She had answered honestly. She worked as a hostess at a nightclub, not a call center operator. She had accepted money for sex twice when rent was due and her parents needed medicine. She would go as far as necessary to change her life. 2 weeks later, she received a phone call asking her to come in for an interview. The producer was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a practiced smile. He sat across from her in an office decorated with photographs of previous contestants, people crying, laughing, shouting, revealing themselves under studio lights. He explained they were looking for someone brave, someone willing to be completely honest, no matter how difficult the questions became, even if it hurt people they cared about. Camila thought about her parents, who had sacrificed everything to raise her in a neighborhood where sacrifice was the only currency that mattered. About Diego, who believed he was dating a call center operator with no secrets worth hiding. "The truth is the truth," she told him, her chin raised defiantly. People deserved to know it. The producer smiled and made a note in his file. She was exactly what they were looking for. The network sent her a packet of information 2 weeks before the show. 21 questions divided into 6 levels of increasing difficulty and monetary reward. 5,000 souls for completing the first level, 10,000 for the second, 15,000 for the third. The questions themselves were redacted, black bars across the paper where the actual words should be. But the categories were listed: family, relationships, work, secrets, money, sex. She studied the packet at her kitchen table while her parents watched the evening news. Her father sat in his chair, tired from another day at the construction site. Her mother mended a tear in one of his work shirts, her fingers moving with the precision of someone who had spent years making things last longer than they were designed to. Her mother glanced up from her mending. Camila claimed it was work materials, training documents. Her mother's needle paused mid-stitch, then resumed its careful rhythm like the tick of an anxious clock. On the final page, in small print, was a warning. Contestants should be prepared for questions of an extremely personal nature. Family members and loved ones would be present during filming and might hear information they had not previously known. Camila folded the packet and slipped it under her mattress. In 3 days, she would sit in a studio chair and tell the truth about her life to an audience of strangers and the people she loved most. Diego came by her house the evening before the show. They walked through the neighborhood in silence, past the corner store where she had bought candy as a child, past the church where her parents had been married, past the bus stop where she caught the route to her real job every night. At the park where children played during the day, Diego stopped walking. She sat on a swing and pushed herself gently back and forth. The chains creaked in the darkness. She confessed she was tired of lying to everyone. Diego sat on the swing beside her. His feet dragged in the dirt, leaving small furrows in the packed earth. They watched their breath turn to mist in the cool night air. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice and then stopped. "Tomorrow I'll be on television," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He reached for her hand. His fingers were warm and familiar. For a moment, she could almost believe that honesty and love could coexist, that truth might set her free without destroying everything she held dear. She stood. Time to go home. Early morning tomorrow. She walked toward home. Diego followed a few steps behind, his footsteps soft on the packed dirt path. At her door, he wished her luck for the following day. "Thank you," she replied, kissed his cheek, and went inside, leaving him standing under the streetlight like a ghost from her past, watching her disappear into the house where all her lies were born. The television studio smelled like hairspray and industrial carpet. Camila sat in a plastic chair while a makeup artist dusted powder across her cheeks. The woman worked quickly, efficiently, like she was preparing dozens of faces every day for public consumption. Behind them, the studio floor buzzed with activity. Camera operators adjusted angles, sound technicians tested microphones. A man with a headset walked between them all, checking items off a clipboard. Camila's parents sat in folding chairs near the craft services table. Her father wore his only suit, navy blue, slightly too large, purchased for her high school graduation 3 years earlier. Her mother had chosen a simple black dress and her best shoes. They looked like people attending church, not television. Diego sat 3 rows behind them in the audience section. He had arrived separately, claiming he needed to pick up his best shirt from the dry cleaner. The white button-down made him look older, more serious. He kept checking his phone. The makeup artist stepped back and examined her work. She told Camila she looked beautiful, natural. The cameras would love her. A production assistant appeared with a clipboard and a warm smile. She explained the process once more. 21 questions across 6 levels. The polygraph would monitor her responses throughout. Family members could press a red button to skip any question that felt too invasive, but only once per level. The money increased with each level completed. 5,000 souls, 10,000, 15,000. The assistant's smile never wavered as she explained what Camila could lose if the machine detected deception. Everything. Camila nodded. She understood the rules. The assistant led her to a side room where the polygraph technician waited. The same man from 3 days earlier, with his careful hands and emotionless expression. He attached the sensors with practiced efficiency around her chest, on her fingertips, the familiar pressure against her throat. He ran a baseline test. He asked her to state her name, her age, her address. The machine hummed quietly, recording the rhythm of truth. Through the one-way mirror, she could see the studio floor, her parents studying the audience around them, Diego scrolling through his phone, the host reviewing note cards at his desk. Beto Ortiz looked exactly like he did on television. Silver hair, perfectly styled, expensive suit that fit like it was made for him. He moved with the confidence of someone who had spent 20 years asking people questions they didn't want to answer. The technician finished his calibrations. The machine was ready. In 15 minutes, she would walk onto that stage and begin. She thought about the envelope of cash hidden in her dresser drawer, about the nights she had told her parents she was working late shifts at the call center, about the men whose faces she tried not to remember. All of that would be different after today. No more lies, no more secrets, just the truth, spoken under bright lights to an audience of strangers and the people she loved most. The production assistant returned. It was time. Camila stood and smoothed her blue dress, the one the wardrobe department had selected because it photographed well under studio lights. She walked toward the stage door, the polygraph wires trailing behind her like copper veins. The studio audience applauded as she entered. The sound was warm, encouraging. These people wanted her to succeed. They wanted her to win money. They wanted her to tell the truth. She took her place behind the curved desk. The studio lights were brighter than she had expected. They made everything beyond the stage disappear into darkness. She could barely see her parents in the front row, though she knew they were there. Beto Ortiz welcomed her with practiced warmth. He explained the rules to the television audience. He introduced her family members, panning the camera across their nervous faces. When the camera found Diego, he smiled and waved. The gesture looked natural, loving. No one watching would guess that he had spent the morning researching how polygraph machines could be fooled. The host opened his note cards. The first question was simple, designed to put contestants at ease. He asked if she had ever told a lie to avoid hurting someone's feelings. Camila looked directly into the camera. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. The truth detector hummed. A green light flashed. The audience applauded. 1 question down, 20 to go. The host smiled and turned to the next card. His expression didn't change, but something in his voice shifted. The green light flickered, and with it, the unraveling began. The first-level questions felt like gentle probes. Have you ever stolen something? Have you ever been unfaithful? Have you ever used drugs? Camila answered each one honestly, watching the green light flash in confirmation. The audience warmed to her with each truth revealed. 5,000 souls, the first milestone reached. Beto Ortiz asked if she wanted to continue. Camila looked toward her parents. Her father sat rigid, his hands clasped in his lap. Her mother's lips moved silently, a prayer or a plea. She chose to continue. The second level brought more personal territory. Questions about family, about shame, about choices she had made when desperate. The audience grew quieter as the revelations deepened. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. 10,000 souls. Again, the choice to continue or walk away. Camila glanced at Diego. He was leaning forward now, no longer checking his phone. His expression shifted slightly. Something flickered behind his eyes. She stayed. The third level began with a question that made the studio fall completely silent. The host asked if her parents would be proud of her real job. Camila's throat went dry. She looked at her mother, whose face had gone pale. Her father's jaw tightened. They believed she worked at a call center. They had bragged about their daughter's respectable job to neighbors, to relatives, to anyone who would listen. The polygraph sensors felt heavier against her skin. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. Green light, truth. The host didn't let the moment settle. He moved to the next card with practiced efficiency. The audience processed what they'd heard. He asked if she had ever accepted money in exchange for sexual favors. The question hung in the air like smoke. In the front row, her mother's hand flew to her mouth. Her father went rigid. The audience held its breath. Camila thought about lying, about protecting her parents from this moment, about preserving Diego's image of who she was. But the machine would know, and she was tired of carrying secrets. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The truth detector glowed green. The audience gasped. A few people applauded. Whether for her honesty or her courage, she couldn't tell. Her mother was crying now, silent tears that she wiped away quickly, trying to maintain composure under the camera lights. Her father stared straight ahead, his face a mask. Diego's expression had changed. The loving smile began to fade. Something cold crept into his features as he watched his world collapse in real time. But Beto Ortiz wasn't finished. The host pressed for details. How many times? Camila admitted it was twice. He asked if she was in a relationship at the time. She hesitated. Diego was watching her. The cameras were rolling. Her parents were listening. She confirmed she had been with Diego during both incidents. He asked if her boyfriend knew. Her answer was swift and final, no. Each revelation felt like stepping off a cliff. Each green light sealed another door behind her. The host consulted his notes. The studio had gone so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. He asked about her current relationship. Was she happy with her boyfriend? Camila looked at Diego. He was sitting perfectly still, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. The mask was slipping further now. She called him a good person, but the host pressed. That wasn't what he had asked. Was she happy? The machine waited. The audience waited. Diego waited. "Happy enough," she said, the words hanging in the air like an indictment. Green light. The final question of the level cut deepest of all. Was this relationship something she saw lasting long-term? Camila closed her eyes. When she opened them, she spoke directly to the camera, delivering the blow that would shatter everything. Until something better comes along. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the truth detector confirmed what everyone had heard. Green light. In the audience, Diego's face went white. He stood up abruptly, then sat back down, aware that cameras might be watching him. His hands were shaking. The transformation was nearly complete. Cold, calculating. Her mother had stopped crying and was staring at her daughter with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Her father looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. 15,000 souls. The third level complete. Beto Ortiz asked if she wanted to continue to level 4. The questions would get harder, more personal, more devastating. Camila looked at the money counter. 15,000 souls was more than her family made in a year. It was enough to change everything. But when she looked at her parents, at Diego, at the faces in the audience, she realized she had already changed everything. There was no going back from this moment. No amount of money could undo what had been said. No apology could repair what had been broken. "I'll take the money," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. The studio erupted in applause, but it sounded hollow now, forced. The audience was clapping for the spectacle, not for her. As the cameras rolled and the host delivered his closing remarks, Camila sat behind the curved desk and felt completely alone. She had told the truth. She had won the money. But when she looked at the people she loved most, she realized there was no applause loud enough to drown out their silence. Her mother wouldn't meet her eyes. Her father stared at the floor. And Diego was looking at her like she was a stranger who had destroyed his life for entertainment. The show was over, but for Camila Ramos, the real consequences were just beginning. The car ride home lasted 27 minutes and felt like hours. Camila sat in the back seat with her mother, who stared out the window at the passing streetlights. Her father drove with both hands gripped tight on the steering wheel, his knuckles white in the dashboard glow. No one spoke. Diego had left the studio separately, claiming he needed to walk, to think, to process what he had heard. Camila had watched him push through the crowd of audience members without looking back. The check for 15,000 souls sat in Camila's purse like evidence of a crime. She had imagined this moment differently, her family celebrating, making plans for how to spend the money, proud of her courage. Instead, her mother pressed herself against the passenger door, as if trying to put distance between them, even in the confined space of the car. When they reached home, her father parked and sat for a moment before turning off the engine. The silence stretched until Camila thought it might never end. Finally, her father spoke, his voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. "We don't talk about what you said, not now, not ever." Her mother got out without another word and walked toward the house. Her father followed, leaving Camila alone in the darkness. Inside, the house felt different. The same furniture, the same photographs on the walls, the same smell of her mother's cooking lingering in the kitchen. But something fundamental had shifted. The air itself seemed heavier. Camila went to her room and closed the door. She sat on her bed and pulled out the check. The numbers looked surreal under her bedside lamp. More money than she had ever seen, enough to change everything. But when she looked around her childhood bedroom, at the posters on the walls, the stuffed animals on the dresser, the photograph of her family at last year's Christmas dinner, she realized that everything had already changed. The night it aired, everything changed. Her phone buzzed. Somewhere online, someone had posted her contact information, maybe a leaked cast list, maybe someone from the studio. A text from an unknown number praising her bravery and beauty, then another cruder message asking about her rates, then another. She turned off the phone and slid it under her pillow. The next morning, her father had already left for work when she woke up. Her mother was in the kitchen, washing dishes that were already clean. She didn't look up when Camila entered. Camila poured herself coffee and sat at the table where she had studied for high school exams, where she had filled out job applications, where she had practiced answers for college interviews she never attended. She spoke her mother's name softly, her mother's hands stilled in the soapy water. Without turning around, she made a simple request. "Not today, please, not today." Camila finished her coffee in silence and left for work, the real work, at the nightclub where she served drinks and smiled at men who paid for her attention, where she had learned that truth was a luxury most people couldn't afford. But when she arrived at Club Paraíso, the manager was waiting for her with an expression she had never seen before. He delivered the news without ceremony. She couldn't work there anymore. Camila stared at him. She had been a good employee, reliable, popular with customers. He explained about the show. Everyone knew who she was now. The other girls were uncomfortable. The customers, he shrugged. It was different now. He handed her an envelope with her final pay, 2 weeks' wages. Not enough to matter. Camila walked out of the club and into the afternoon sunlight. The street looked the same as always. Busy, dirty, full of people going about their lives, but she felt like she was walking through a different city, one where everyone knew her secrets. Her phone had 17 missed calls, all from numbers she didn't recognize. She was famous now, for all the wrong reasons. That evening, Diego finally came to see her. He knocked on the front door like a stranger, though he had been walking into her house unannounced for 8 months. Her father answered and spoke to him in low tones on the front step. Camila couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language. 2 men negotiating the aftermath of public humiliation. When Diego finally entered, he looked different, older, harder. His eyes were red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept. They sat in the living room while her parents retreated to the kitchen. The television was off. The house was so quiet she could hear the neighbor's radio playing through the thin walls. He told her everyone knew, his friends, his family, everyone at work. They had all seen what she said about him. "I didn't lie," she said, meeting his gaze. His anger flared immediately. He snapped back about the humiliation she had caused him. "But I told the truth," Camila replied, her voice steady. Diego laughed, but there was no humor in it. He described what it was like to have every person at work look at him like he was pathetic, like he was some fool who couldn't keep his girlfriend from selling herself. Camila felt something cold settle in her stomach. She insisted she had never sold herself. He asked what she called it then. "Survival," she said, the word final. Their conversation grew heated. Diego demanded to know what they had meant to each other. Camila told him they had what they had, nothing more. Diego stood up abruptly. He walked to the window and stared out at the street where they had walked together so many evenings. When he turned back, his focus had shifted to the money. She had won 15,000 souls. She confirmed this without elaboration. He declared it was their money. They were together. What was hers was his. Camila stared at his back. She reminded him they weren't married. "But we're together," he insisted. "Are we?" she asked, the question hanging between them. He turned around. His expression was different now. Not hurt, not angry, something calculating. "Of course they were," he said. "What happened on that show was television. This was real life." She contradicted him. The show was real life. Everything else was pretending. Diego walked back to the couch, but didn't sit down. He stood over her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to see his face. He insisted she should share the money. After what she put him through, it was the least she could do. "And if I don't?" Camila asked, her voice sharp with defiance. Diego's pause was loaded with menace. He suggested that maybe other people needed to know more about the real Camila Ramos, things that didn't make it onto television. The threat hung between them like a blade. Camila realized that she was seeing Diego clearly for the first time. Not the loving boyfriend, not the supportive partner, but someone who believed he owned her, someone who thought her truth belonged to him. "Get out," she whispered. He reached for her, speaking her name like a caress-turned weapon. "Get out of my house!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the rooms. Diego's mask slipped completely, his face twisted with rage and humiliation, and something else, something that made Camila glad her parents were in the next room. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and threatening. After he left, Camila sat alone in the living room and listened to her parents whispering in the kitchen. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. They were discussing what to do about their daughter, how to handle the shame she had brought to their family, how to live with the truth she had told. Outside, night was falling over the neighborhood. Soon, the streets would fill with people going to clubs, to bars, to places where other young women served drinks and smiled at strangers and made choices between dignity and survival. Camila looked at her purse, where the check for 15,000 souls waited to be cashed. She had won, but winning felt an awful lot like losing everything that mattered. 3 days passed before Diego called again. 3 days of Camila eating silent meals with her parents, of neighbors averting their eyes when she walked to the corner store, of her phone buzzing with messages from strangers who had seen the show. When his name appeared on her screen, she almost didn't answer. He apologized when she picked up. His voice was different, softer, more like the Diego she remembered. He had been angry. He had said terrible things. He was ashamed of how he had behaved. Camila sat on her bed, the phone pressed to her ear. Outside, children played in the street, their laughter drifting through her window. She reminded him that he had threatened her. He acknowledged this with what seemed like genuine regret. That wasn't who he was. The show had made him crazy with jealousy and hurt, but he had been thinking. And he understood now why she had said what she did. She had been brave. He had been a coward. This surprised her. Diego admitting fault was not something she had expected. He explained that he didn't want to lose her over this. They had something real, something worth fighting for. Could they meet somewhere to talk? Really talk, without anger or accusations? Camila hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no, to let the relationship die with whatever dignity it had left. But another part, the part that remembered 8 months of shared jokes and quiet evenings, wanted to believe that Diego could change. She asked where he wanted to meet. He suggested they meet somewhere private where they could really talk. He knew a quiet spot on the hill overlooking the city, a place where couples sometimes went to watch the sunset. They could sit in his car and talk without interruption. She could bring a friend if it made her feel better, he added. He just wanted a chance to apologize properly, to see if they could find a way forward together. When? She asked, pulling her knees to her chest. Tomorrow evening, he said. After her parents went to bed, they could talk without anyone listening, without anyone judging. Camila was quiet for a long moment. The offer felt genuine. Diego sounded like the man she had fallen in love with, not the angry stranger who had confronted her 3 days earlier. She agreed to meet him. Thank you, he said, relief evident in his voice. I'll make this right, Camila, I promise. After he hung up, Camila lay back on her bed and stared at the ceiling. Maybe there was a way to salvage something from the wreckage of the past week. Maybe honesty could coexist with love, given time and patience. She didn't tell her parents about the plan. They had enough to worry about without knowing she was meeting the man who had threatened her just days before. The next evening, Camila told her parents she was going for a walk. She needed air, space to think. They nodded without question. She had been restless since the show, and walking seemed harmless enough. The overlook was exactly as Diego had described, a quiet spot on the hillside where the city lights spread out below like scattered stars. His car was parked in the shadows, away from the road. Diego was waiting inside, exactly where they had arranged to meet. He looked different, thinner, older. His clothes were wrinkled, like he hadn't been sleeping well. Thank you for coming, he said as she approached the passenger side. She got into the car but kept her hand on the door handle. She told him she was listening. He launched into an explanation about what she had said on the show, about the men she had been with, about their relationship being temporary. At first, he had been angry because it felt like betrayal, but then he realized she had been honest about who she was, and he had been lying about who he was. He claimed he loved her enough to want her to be free, free to make choices without his approval, free to have a past without his judgment, free to tell the truth without his permission. The words were right, the tone was sincere, but something in Diego's posture, the way he leaned slightly too close in the confined space, the way his eyes never quite met hers, made Camila uneasy. He reached into the back seat, explaining he had brought her something. He pulled out a bottle of her favorite drink, passion fruit juice mixed with sparkling water, the kind they used to share when they first started dating. A peace offering, he said, opening the bottle and handing it to her. Camila looked at the drink, then at Diego's face. The gesture felt forced, theatrical, like he was following a script rather than acting from genuine emotion. But the evening was warm, and she was thirsty from the walk uphill. She took a small sip. The taste was wrong. She pulled it from her lips. Diego was watching too closely, eyes tracking her throat like a predator watching prey swallow. He asked if something was wrong, his concern seeming overplayed. She mentioned the strange taste. He dismissed it casually. Maybe the drink was old. He claimed he had bought it yesterday. She took another sip, smaller this time. The bitterness was more pronounced now, but Diego was watching her with such hopeful attention that she didn't want to reject his gesture entirely. She assured him it was fine, setting the bottle in the cup holder between them. They talked for another 10 minutes. Diego apologized again. He spoke about wanting to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of honesty and trust. He claimed he had been wrong to feel entitled to her secrets. But Camila found it increasingly difficult to focus on his words. The world seemed to be growing softer around the edges. Her limbs felt heavy. He asked if she was okay, his voice sounding distant despite being right beside her in the car. She started to respond, but couldn't finish the sentence. The words felt thick in her mouth. He observed that she looked tired. Maybe she should rest her head back. She tried to reach for the door handle, but her coordination was failing. Diego gently guided her hand away. "I'll help you," he said, his tone shifting to something more possessive. Through the growing fog in her mind, Camila realized what had happened. The drink, the bitter taste, Diego's careful attention to whether she was drinking it. A flash of memory pierced the haze. Childhood summers, her grandmother's garden, the taste of fresh mangoes, the swing set where she used to dream of growing up. She tried to speak, to call for help, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. Outside the car windows, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold. "Don't worry," Diego said, adjusting her seat so she could lie back. "I'll take care of everything." The overlook was empty now. No witnesses, no one to see a young woman slumped unconscious in the passenger seat of her boyfriend's car. Camila tried to resist, but her body no longer responded to her commands. She could only watch helplessly as Diego started the engine. "I'm sorry," Diego said as they began the drive toward the countryside, his apology hollow. "But you wouldn't have come if I told you the truth." As they drove through the quiet streets of Lima, heading toward the countryside, Camila drifted in and out of consciousness. Diego drove in focused silence, following a route he had clearly planned in advance. By the time they reached the isolated farmhouse, 3 hours from the city, Camila understood that she had made a terrible mistake. Diego hadn't changed at all. He had simply gotten better at lying. Camila woke to the smell of chickens and wood smoke. Her head felt like it was filled with cotton, her mouth dry as sand. She lay on an unfamiliar bed in a room she had never seen before. The walls were rough wood planks. A single window showed empty fields stretching to the horizon. No houses, no roads, no signs of civilization beyond this place. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The room spun around her, and nausea rose in her throat. Whatever Diego had put in that drink was still working its way through her system. Her purse was missing. Phone, ID, everything gone. The door opened. Diego entered carrying a glass of water and what looked like crackers on a plate. "You're awake," he said, setting the items on a small dresser. "Good." I was starting to worry. Her voice came out as a croak when she asked where they were. Diego explained they were at his uncle's farm, somewhere they could talk without interruption. Camila looked toward the window again. The isolation was complete. Even if she could run, and in her current state she doubted she could walk, there was nowhere to go. She accused him of drugging her. Diego's response was calm, almost casual. He had given her something to help her relax. She was so tense at the park, so suspicious of everything he said. "Because you were lying," she managed to say. "Because you wouldn't listen any other way," he replied, settling into a chair beside the bed. Diego studied her face with an expression that was calm, almost tender, like they were having a normal conversation about normal things. He urged her to drink the water. She was dehydrated. Camila didn't move toward the glass. She had learned not to trust anything Diego offered her. He assured her it was just water. He didn't need to drug her anymore. There was nowhere for her to go. This was true, but it didn't make her feel any safer. She remained still on the bed, watching Diego's face for clues about what came next. Finally, he revealed the real reason she was here. They needed to talk about the money. She asked what money, though they both knew exactly what he meant. Diego's voice grew sharper, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead as he detailed his grievances. The 15,000 souls she had won, plus whatever was in her bank account. He had supported her for 8 months. He had believed her lies about working at a call center. He had defended her when people said she was acting suspicious. He had loved her when she was selling herself to other men. His voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. The mask was slipping again. She insisted she hadn't asked him to do any of that. His response was bitter. She had let him. She had let him look like a fool while she counted her secrets like coins. From somewhere else in the house came the sound of a television, a man's voice, older, gravelly. Diego's uncle was here too. She asked what he wanted from her. Diego's voice modulated higher now as he laid out his demands. Half the prize money, and he wanted her to give him her bank information so they could access the rest. When she asked what happened after that, his answer was vague. They would decide what came next. But Camila could see in his eyes that he had already decided. Whatever happened next, it wouldn't involve her walking away from this place. She told him no. Diego's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted. He sat back in the chair and crossed his arms. He had expected this response, he said, but she should know that his uncle Raul wasn't as patient as he was. He had been very inconvenienced by having her here. He might decide she was more trouble than she was worth. As if summoned by his name, Uncle Raul appeared in the doorway. He was a thin man in his 60s, with weathered hands and eyes that took in everything without revealing anything in return. He looked at Camila with the expression of someone examining a problem he wished would solve itself. Raul asked if she was awake. Diego confirmed she was. Raul nodded and disappeared back into the house, but his presence lingered like a threat. Over the next few hours, Diego alternated between charm and intimidation. He brought her food and spoke about their relationship as if it were something that could still be salvaged. Then he would mention the inconvenience she was causing his uncle, the isolation of the farm, the fact that no one knew where she was. During one of these conversations, he made his offer again. She should give him the bank information. They would split everything 50-50 and figure out what came next. Her answer remained the same. No. She had begun to understand that giving Diego what he wanted wouldn't save her. It would only eliminate his reason for keeping her alive. Late in the afternoon, when Diego left the room to use the bathroom, Camila encountered Uncle Raul in the hallway. He was carrying a cup of coffee and moving slowly, like someone whose bones ached from years of hard work. "Please," she whispered, grabbing his arm, "help me." Raul looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face. For a moment, she thought she saw something like sympathy in his expression. "It's between you and the boy," he said quietly, pulling his arm free. "Family business." She told him Diego was going to kill her. "That's not my concern," Raul replied, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. He walked away, leaving her alone in the narrow hallway. That evening, Diego's patience began to wear thin. He had been at the farm for hours, and Camila had given him nothing useful. No bank codes, no cooperation, no acknowledgement that he deserved compensation for the humiliation she had caused him. He accused her of being stubborn, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "I'm being smart," she replied. "Smart would be recognizing the situation you're in," Diego said. "I know exactly what situation I'm in," she countered sharply. Diego stopped pacing and stared at her. His next words carried a chill that made her blood turn cold. "Do you?" From the main room came the sound of Uncle Raul's television. A soccer game, the announcer's voice rising and falling with the action. Normal sounds from a normal evening in a normal house. But nothing about this evening was normal. Diego delivered his ultimatum. "Last chance. Tell me how to access your account." Camila met his eyes and saw something there that confirmed what she already knew. Whether she gave him the information or not, she wasn't leaving this farm alive. "No," she said one final time. Diego nodded, as if her answer had settled something in his mind. "I'm sorry it has to be this way," he said, his voice devoid of genuine remorse. From the main room, the television grew louder. Uncle Raul had turned up the volume, drowning out whatever sounds might come from the back bedroom. Camila understood that he knew exactly what was about to happen, and he had chosen to look the other way. Mrs. Ramos began to worry on the second day. Camila had said she was going for a walk Tuesday evening. When restless, she would wander the neighborhood streets, sometimes reaching the park or even the main avenue where the buses ran, but she always came home. Wednesday morning, her bed was still made. Her purse was gone, but her clothes remained in the closet. Her toothbrush sat unused in the bathroom. By Wednesday evening, Mrs. Ramos was standing at the kitchen window every few minutes, watching the street for her daughter's familiar figure. Mr. Ramos sat at the table pretending to read a newspaper, but his eyes kept flicking toward the door. Thursday morning, they called the police. Detective Valera arrived at noon, younger than they had expected, but with careful eyes and a notebook that looked well used. He declined their offer of coffee and began with simple questions. When had they last seen their daughter? What was her state of mind? Had she mentioned any plans to travel? Mrs. Ramos explained about the walk. Camila had seemed troubled since the television show, restless, quiet, distant, but she hadn't mentioned going anywhere specific. Valera asked what she had taken with her. Mrs. Ramos wrung her hands as she answered. Her purse, some money, but all her clothes were still there. Valera made notes. A young woman taking only her purse suggested either a short trip or an unplanned disappearance. He asked about the television show. Mrs. Ramos flinched at the mention. They told him reluctantly about the confessions, the money, the aftermath that had made their daughter's life difficult. The detective inquired about threats. The parents exchanged glances. Phone calls from strangers, men following her on the street, neighbors who whispered and pointed. When Valera asked about her boyfriend, another glance passed between the parents. Diego Leon. They had been together 8 months. He worked at a textile factory. He had been upset about the show. Mr. Ramos revealed that Diego had last visited on Saturday. They had argued. Mrs. Ramos added that Camila had been angry after Diego left. She wouldn't say what they had fought about, but she had seemed relieved when he was gone. Valera wrote down Diego's information and promised to speak with him. Diego's apartment was in a rundown building 20 minutes from the Ramos house. The landlady who answered the door was suspicious and sharp-eyed. She described Diego as a quiet tenant who paid his rent on time and kept to himself, but lately he had seemed agitated. The television show had embarrassed him in front of the whole neighborhood. When Valera asked if Diego was home, the landlady confirmed he should be. He had been keeping regular hours since all this started. Goes to work, comes home, doesn't go out much. Diego answered his door, looking tired but not surprised to see a police officer. He invited Valera in without hesitation and offered him coffee. The apartment was neat, lived in. Nothing seemed hurried or out of place. Valera explained about Camila's disappearance. Diego's face went through what seemed like genuine emotions: surprise, concern, worry. The detective asked when Diego had last seen her, watching his reactions carefully. Diego answered without hesitation, Saturday. He had gone to her house. They had argued about everything that had happened since the show. When asked how the argument ended, Diego's voice carried what seemed like regret. She had told him to leave, said she didn't want to see him anymore. Valera pressed about subsequent contact. Diego paused, as if considering whether to reveal something personal. He admitted to calling her Tuesday evening after work. He had wanted to apologize, to try at working things out. The detective asked how that conversation had gone. Diego ran his hands through his hair as he described it. Badly, he said. She was angry, said she was tired of Lima, tired of people staring at her, tired of me. She wanted to leave the city, start over somewhere else. When asked for his thoughts on her plan, Diego explained that he thought she was running away from her problems instead of facing them. He had told her they could work through this together, but she didn't want to hear it. She hung up on him. Valera made notes. This matched what the parents had described. Camila going for a walk Tuesday evening, presumably upset about something. The detective established the timeline. The phone call had been around 7:30, right after Diego got home from work. Diego explained what he had done after she hung up. He stayed home. He was upset. He thought about calling her back, but figured she needed space to cool down. When asked if he had tried to contact her since then, Diego shook his head. He thought maybe she would call when she was ready to talk. But now he looked genuinely worried, asking if the detective thought she had really left town. It was a reasonable concern. If Camila had been talking about leaving Lima, her disappearance could be voluntary rather than criminal. Valera assured him they were looking into all possibilities, then asked if anyone could confirm Diego was home Tuesday night after the phone call. Diego suggested his neighbor might have heard his television. He was watching the news, but he hadn't talked to anyone. Valera made note of this, a weak alibi, but not necessarily suspicious. Many people spent evenings alone at home. At the textile factory, Diego's supervisor confirmed that he had worked a full shift Tuesday, leaving at his usual time around 6 p.m. Several co-workers remembered seeing him that day. Nothing unusual in his behavior or demeanor. This created a timeline that seemed to support Diego's story. If he had worked until 6 and called Camila around 7:30, there would have been just enough time for him to go home, eat dinner, and make the call. Valera expanded the investigation. Missing person flyers went up around the neighborhood. Local police checked hospitals, bus stations, hotels. The television angle complicated everything. Tips poured in from across the city, most of them false or irrelevant. A taxi driver thought he had picked up a young woman matching Camila's description Tuesday night, heading toward the bus terminal, but he couldn't be certain it was her. A hotel clerk in the city center was certain she had checked in Wednesday morning, but when police arrived, they found a different woman who only resembled Camila from a distance. 3 days into the investigation, Valera got his first real break. Phone records confirmed Diego's story about calling Camila Tuesday evening. The call had been placed at 7:34 p.m. and lasted 8 minutes. 8 minutes was consistent with the argument Diego had described. Long enough for a real conversation, but not so long that it suggested anything more complicated. But the phone records revealed something else. Diego had made another call that same evening at 10:15 p.m. to a rural number registered under the name Raul Mendoza. When Valera called the number, no one answered. He checked the address, a farm property 3 hours northeast of Lima, in an area with spotty phone service and few neighbors. Valera returned to question Diego about this second call. Diego seemed genuinely surprised that police had checked his phone records so thoroughly, but he didn't appear evasive about the call. He explained it was his uncle. He had been upset after talking to Camila and needed family advice. When asked what kind of advice, Diego replied that he wanted to know whether he should try to call her back or give her the space she seemed to want. His uncle was older, more experienced with relationships. He thought he might have some wisdom. Diego claimed his uncle had advised him to let her cool down for a few days, that maybe she would change her mind about leaving the city if he didn't pressure her. It was a reasonable explanation. The timing made sense. Diego had been upset after arguing with Camila, so he had called his uncle for guidance. When Valera asked to speak with the uncle, Diego said he could try, but warned that his uncle didn't have reliable phone service out there, and he wasn't very talkative, especially with strangers. He might not be much help. The detective mentioned he might drive out there anyway, watching Diego's reaction. Diego responded with what seemed like genuine indifference. His uncle was usually around the farm during the day. Just don't expect much conversation. Valera left the apartment with the impression that Diego was being cooperative and honest. The young man had admitted to both phone calls, explained his movements, and seemed genuinely concerned about Camila's welfare. But something still bothered him. Diego's explanations were almost too neat, too reasonable, like someone who had thought carefully about what story to tell. Valera made a note to follow up on his instincts. Sometimes the cleanest stories were the ones that hid the messiest truths. 5 days after Camila's disappearance, Valera made the drive to Raul Mendoza's farm. The property was more isolated than he had expected. No neighbors visible in any direction. The kind of place where someone could disappear without anyone noticing. When he arrived, the farmhouse appeared deserted. No vehicles in the yard. No response to his knocking. The chickens in the yard seemed agitated, like they hadn't been fed recently. A neighbor, the nearest house was 2 kilometers away, said he hadn't seen Raul or any visitors for several days. This was unusual. Raul was a creature of habit who rarely left his property. Valera walked around the farmhouse, looking for signs of recent activity. The ground near an old barn showed tire tracks, but they could have been from routine farm work. He made note of everything and drove back to Lima, but now he had a new concern. If Raul Mendoza had been Diego's alibi for Tuesday night, where was he now? That evening, Valera called Diego to ask about his uncle's whereabouts. Diego explained that his uncle sometimes went to visit a cousin in Huancayo, especially this time of year to help with the harvest. When asked how long such visits typically lasted, Diego said a week, maybe 2. His uncle didn't keep a regular schedule. The detective asked for contact information for this cousin. Diego said he could try to find it, but warned they weren't close. His uncle mostly kept to himself. The explanation was plausible, but it meant Valera couldn't verify Diego's account of their Tuesday night phone conversation. 1 week after Camila's disappearance, the investigation had stalled. No credible sightings, no evidence of foul play, no clear indication of where she might have gone. Diego continued to be cooperative when contacted. He even helped distribute missing person flyers in his neighborhood, asking friends and co-workers if they had seen or heard from Camila. But Valera couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The case felt too clean, too simple. A young woman arguing with her boyfriend, then disappearing after talking about leaving town. Real life was usually messier than that. And Diego Leon seemed just a little too calm, just a little too composed, for someone whose girlfriend had vanished without a trace. Valera decided to dig deeper into the phone records and timeline. If Diego was hiding something, the details would eventually reveal it. He just had to be patient enough to find them. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A farmer named Esteban Gutierrez called the police station on a Monday morning, 10 days after Camila was first reported missing. Gutierrez lived 5 kilometers from Raul Mendoza's property. He had been checking his irrigation ditches when his dog started acting strangely, whining, circling, pawing at the ground near a remote section of his land. When Gutierrez investigated, he found recently disturbed earth. Someone had been digging there, and recently. The soil was loose, different from the packed ground around it. Detective Valera drove out with a forensics team. Though he wasn't optimistic, rural areas often yielded false alarms. Animal burials, old trash dumps, routine farm excavations. But this was different. The forensics team worked carefully with shovels and brushes. The smell hit them first. Sweet, rotting, wrong. Then the color of the soil changed. Darker, richer. Then they found fabric. What they uncovered confirmed Valera's worst fears and validated his growing suspicions about Diego Leon. Camila Ramos lay wrapped in a tarp, buried in a shallow grave. The medical examiner would later determine she had been dead for approximately 10 days, placing her death right around the time she had disappeared. But the burial site raised immediate questions. It wasn't on Raul Mendoza's property, though it was close, within walking distance of the farmhouse. Someone had chosen this location deliberately, remote enough to avoid discovery, but not directly on any single property. Valera examined the area around the grave. Tire tracks led from the burial site to a dirt road that connected to the main highway. The tracks were fresh, consistent with a pickup truck or similar vehicle. The medical examiner's preliminary findings were disturbing. Camila showed signs of having ingested a sedative, likely a veterinary tranquilizer commonly used on farm animals. She had also been strangled. This was premeditated murder, not a crime of passion or an accident. More importantly, it proved that Diego Leon had been lying. Camila hadn't left town voluntarily after their phone argument. She had been murdered, and the location suggested a connection to Raul Mendoza's farm. Valera immediately obtained warrants for both properties, Raul's farm and Diego's apartment. The search of Diego's apartment revealed something that had been hidden during the earlier cursory visits. In a drawer beneath some clothes, officers found veterinary sedatives, the same type found in Camila's system. When confronted, Diego claimed he had used them to treat a neighbor's sick dog months earlier, but the bottles were nearly full and recently purchased. At Raul Mendoza's farm, the evidence was more extensive. The property was still deserted, but forensics found signs that multiple people had been there recently. Food for more than one person, bedding that had been used and hastily cleaned, traces of bleach in areas that wouldn't normally require such thorough cleaning. Most importantly, they found blood traces in the farmhouse's back bedroom, trace amounts that someone had tried to clean but hadn't completely eliminated. DNA testing would later confirm the blood was Camila's. Behind the barn, tire tracks matched those found at the burial site. Someone had driven from the farmhouse to the location where Camila was buried, following a route that avoided main roads and neighbors. But there was still no sign of Raul Mendoza. The man seemed to have vanished completely. Valera now had enough evidence to arrest Diego Leon for murder. But when police went to his apartment, Diego was gone. His landlady said she had seen him leave that morning with a small bag, like he was going on a trip. He had seemed nervous, hurried, different from his usual calm demeanor. Diego's disappearance confirmed what the evidence already suggested. He was guilty, and he knew the investigation was closing in on him. An alert went out immediately. Diego's photograph was distributed to police departments across Peru and neighboring countries. Bus stations, airports, and border crossings were notified. But Diego had several hours head start, and with Camila's stolen money, he could afford to travel quickly and stay ahead of law enforcement. The manhunt lasted 3 days. Diego had been smart about his escape route, avoiding major cities and staying away from places where he might be recognized, but he made one crucial mistake. At a bus station in a small border town, he tried to purchase a ticket to Colombia using a fake ID. The document was poorly made, and the ticket agent became suspicious. When police arrived, they found Diego in the station bathroom, trying to flush what remained of Camila's prize money down the toilet. Most of it was already gone, spent on transportation, food, and bribes to get this far, but he still had enough cash to prove he had robbed her, and the denominations matched what her parents said she had withdrawn from the bank before her disappearance. Diego was arrested without resistance. He seemed exhausted, almost relieved to be caught. During the transport back to Lima, Diego said nothing to his guards, but once he was in the interrogation room with Valera, his story began to change dramatically. Gone was the cooperative, concerned boyfriend. In his place sat a man who realized his lies had been exposed and was now trying to minimize his legal exposure. "I didn't mean for her to die," Diego said, before Valera even asked his first question. It was supposed to be simple. When asked what was supposed to be simple, his response was chilling in its matter-of-factness. "Getting the money," Diego replied, his voice flat and emotionless. "She owed me that much, after what she did to me on that show." Valera let Diego talk, recording everything. Sometimes the best interrogation technique was simply letting guilty people explain themselves. Diego's new version of events was very different from his original story. He had indeed called Camila Tuesday evening, but not to apologize. He had lured her to meet him at the Overlook by claiming he wanted to return some of her belongings. When she arrived, he had given her a drink spiked with the veterinary sedative. Once she was unconscious, he had driven her to his uncle's farm. Diego insisted the drugs were just to keep her calm while they talked about the money. She wasn't supposed to die. When asked about his uncle's involvement, Diego confirmed that Raúl knew he was bringing her, but didn't want to be involved. He had said it was Diego's problem to solve. According to Diego, Camila had been conscious but groggy when they arrived at the farm. He had tried to convince her to share the prize money with him, half for her, half for him, as compensation for the humiliation she had caused. When Valera asked what she had said, Diego's voice hardened. She had refused, said the money was hers, that he deserved nothing from her. The detective pressed him about what happened next. Diego's justification was as pathetic as it was revealing. She had started screaming, he claimed, calling for help. His uncle told him to make her stop, that the neighbors might hear. When Valera pointed out that he had strangled her, Diego insisted he was just trying to keep her quiet, but she kept fighting, kept trying to scream. It went too far. Even in confession, Diego was trying to make the murder seem accidental, impulsive, but the physical evidence told a different story. The amount of sedative in Camila's system suggested careful calculation. The strangulation had taken sustained effort. When asked about his uncle's role, Diego admitted that Raúl had helped him bury her. He said they had to make it look like she had run away, like Diego originally told the police. Valera asked where Raúl was now. Diego claimed not to know. After they buried her, his uncle told him to go back to Lima and act normal. He said he would disappear for a while, in case anyone came looking. The detective pressed about the money. When had Diego taken it? Diego's answer revealed the calculated nature of the crime. He had taken her money before killing her. She had given him her bank card and PIN when he first asked, but then she changed her mind, said she wanted it back. That's when she started screaming. This detail was crucial. Diego hadn't killed Camila in a moment of passion. He had tortured her for her banking information first, then killed her when she tried to reclaim control of her own money. Valera pointed out that Diego had withdrawn money from her account for 3 days after she was already dead. Diego's response showed the depth of his deception. He had to make it look like she was still alive, like she had taken the money and left town, just like she said she wanted to. He wore a cap, avoided cameras, and used ATMs at night to avoid detection. Every detail of Diego's confession revealed more planning, more deliberate deception. This was not an accidental death or a crime of passion. It was premeditated murder committed for financial gain. Diego León was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, robbery, and fraud. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His own confession, the physical evidence from both crime scenes, and the stolen money found in his possession. But questions remained about Raul Mendoza's role and whereabouts. Was he a co-conspirator who had helped plan the murder, or a reluctant accomplice who had been coerced into helping with the cover-up? And where had he disappeared to? Was he hiding somewhere in Peru's vast rural areas, or had he fled the country entirely? For Detective Valera, the case was largely solved. Diego Leon would face justice for Camila's murder, but the loose ends bothered him. Especially the question of how many people had known what was happening to Camila and chosen not to help her. In a few weeks, the trial would begin. Diego's confession would be presented to a jury, along with the physical evidence and witness testimony. But for Camila's parents, no amount of justice could bring back their daughter. No conviction could undo the fact that she had died for telling the truth about her life. The television show that had made her famous would continue broadcasting. New contestants would sit in the same chair, answer the same types of questions, face the same potential consequences, because there would always be someone else willing to trade their secrets for money, regardless of the risks. And there would always be people like Diego Leon, who believed that other people's honesty was a personal betrayal that deserved punishment. The trial began 4 months after Camila's body was found. Every day, cameras lined the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions at anyone connected to the case. The same media machine that had made Camila famous now fed on her death. Diego's defense attorney argued that his client was guilty of manslaughter, not murder. Diego had given Camila a sedative to calm her down, but had accidentally overdosed her. Everything that followed, the cover-up, the robbery, the burial, had been panic, not premeditation. The prosecution disagreed. They presented evidence of planning. Diego's researching of sedatives, his phone calls to his uncle before the crime, his systematic withdrawal of money from Camila's account over several days. This was first-degree murder committed for financial gain. The Ramos family attended every day of the trial. Mrs. Ramos sat in the front row, her face a mask of controlled grief. She had aged years in the months since Camila's death. Her hair had gone completely gray. She moved carefully, like someone whose body had betrayed her, along with everything else. Mr. Ramos said nothing to reporters. He arrived each morning, sat through the proceedings, and left without comment. But Detective Valera, who attended most sessions, noticed that his hands shook whenever Diego spoke. The television network executives testified about their show's format and safeguards. They insisted that contestants were warned about potential consequences, that participation was voluntary, that the network bore no responsibility for the actions of unstable individuals. El Valor de la Verdad had continued broadcasting throughout the investigation and trial. New contestants, new secrets, new confessions. The show added a disclaimer after Camila's death, a warning that revealing personal information could have unintended consequences, but otherwise operated unchanged. The show's ratings had actually increased since the murder. Viewers were drawn by the tragedy, the connection between televised truth-telling and real-world violence. Diego's mother testified for the defense. She described her son as gentle, loving, incapable of premeditated murder. The television show had humiliated him beyond reason. He had acted out of desperation and shame, not calculated malice. But under cross-examination, she admitted that Diego had always been possessive, controlling, quick to anger when he felt disrespected. The prosecutor pressed her about Diego's attitude toward Camila's prize money. Her reluctant response revealed the heart of the prosecution's case. Diego had felt the money should have been shared. They were a couple. What belonged to one should belong to both. When asked if this applied even after Camila had ended their relationship, her answer was damning. Diego didn't accept that the relationship was over. This was the crux of the prosecution's argument. Diego hadn't been able to accept Camila's autonomy, her right to leave him, her right to control her own money, her right to tell her own truth. 3 weeks into the trial, Raul Mendoza was found. He had been living in a remote cabin in the mountains, 300 kilometers from his farm. Local police discovered him during a routine check of hunting shelters. Raul looked like he had aged a decade in the months since Camila's murder. He was thinner, grayer, with the hollow eyes of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. When arrested, he didn't resist. He seemed almost relieved to be caught. In custody, Raúl's story corroborated some of Diego's claims, while revealing the extent of his own moral cowardice. Yes, Diego had called him Tuesday night asking to use the farm. Yes, he had agreed, thinking it was just relationship drama. The prosecutor asked if Diego had told him he was bringing Camila against her will. Raúl's response, delivered while staring at his weathered hands, was that Diego had said they were going to talk things out, that she had agreed to come with him. When asked what he saw when they arrived, Raúl's voice became barely audible. She was unconscious in Diego's truck. Diego claimed she had been drinking, that she just needed to sleep it off. The prosecutor pressed whether he believed this story. "I wanted to believe him," Raúl said, his shame evident. "He's family." It was easier than asking questions. He paused, then added quietly, "I hadn't watched the show. Didn't own a television. Didn't know the truth until later." But as the hours passed, Raúl had realized that Camila wasn't just sleeping off alcohol. She was drugged, and she was a prisoner. Raúl testified that she woke up confused and scared, started asking where she was, begging him to help her get home. When asked what he did, his answer fell like a stone in the silent courtroom. "Nothing," he said. "I told her it was between her and Diego, that it wasn't my business." The prosecutor asked if this remained his position, even though he could see she was frightened. Raúl's response, delivered while looking directly at the jury for the first time, revealed his moral failure. He didn't want to get involved. He knew if he helped her, Diego would get in trouble. And Diego was family. When Diego had begun demanding Camila's banking information, Raúl had retreated to the barn. He had stayed there for hours, turning up his radio to drown out the sounds from the house. His testimony grew more damning. He admitted he knew what was happening, but told himself it was just about money, that Diego wouldn't really hurt her. The prosecutor asked when he realized she was dead. Raúl's voice broke as he described Diego coming to get him. She was lying on the bedroom floor. Her face was... He stopped, unable to continue. When asked what Diego told him, Raúl explained that Diego said she had fought back when he tried to get the money, that things had gotten out of hand. He was panicking, asking Raúl what to do. The prosecutor pressed about why he helped bury the body. "Because by then, I was part of it," Raúl said, meeting the prosecutor's eyes. "I could have saved her, and I chose not to. That made me guilty too." When asked if he had helped plan the murder, Raúl was firm in his denial. He thought Diego just wanted to talk to her, maybe convince her to share the prize money. He never thought it would end in murder. But the prosecutor pointed out that he knew Diego had drugged her. Raúl admitted he suspected something was wrong, but didn't want to know for certain. It was easier to pretend it was just a lover's quarrel. The most damning part of Raúl's testimony was his description of Camila's final hours. She had begged him multiple times for help, had offered him money to call the police, had promised she wouldn't press charges if he just let her go. Raúl testified that she kept saying she was scared, that Diego wasn't acting like himself. She asked him to just drive her to the main road so she could catch a bus home. When the prosecutor asked why he didn't help her, Raúl's answer was brutally honest. "Because I'm a coward," he said simply. "I was afraid of what would happen to my family if Diego got arrested, so I let an innocent girl die to protect someone who didn't deserve protecting." The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous on all counts. Diego León, guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of kidnapping, guilty of robbery. Raúl Mendoza, guilty as an accessory to murder. Diego was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Raúl received 18 years. As the sentences were read, Diego showed no emotion. He stared straight ahead, his face blank. When given the opportunity to address the court, he declined. Camila's parents wept quietly. Mrs. Ramos refused to look at Diego as he was led away in chains. Mr. Ramos held his wife's hand, but kept his eyes fixed on Diego, watching the man who had destroyed their family disappear into the justice system forever. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded the family, microphones thrust toward their faces, questions shouted from every direction. Mr. Ramos stopped walking and faced the cameras. His words were few, but they carried the weight of unspeakable loss. She gave him truth, he gave her death. Then he walked away, his arm around his wife's shoulders. The media coverage continued for weeks. Analysis of the case, debates about the television show's responsibility, discussion of domestic violence and male entitlement. But eventually, other stories took precedence. The case faded from front pages and primetime coverage. Life moved on for everyone except the people who had loved Camila Ramos. Her parents returned to their small house in the working-class neighborhood. Mrs. Ramos went back to her job at the textile factory. Mr. Ramos continued his construction work. They attempted to rebuild routines that had been shattered by their daughter's honesty and death. But the house felt different, empty. Camila's bedroom remained exactly as she had left it, her clothes in the closet, her makeup on the dresser. The prize money, what remained after Diego's theft, sat in a bank account her parents couldn't bring themselves to touch. The money felt cursed, blood money, a reminder of how truth could be weaponized against the truthful. Detective Valera was promoted after closing the case. His superiors praised his thorough investigation and successful prosecution, but he found no satisfaction in the recognition. The case had changed his perspective on his work. He had seen how quickly love could become possession, how easily shame could justify violence. He had learned that the people closest to victims were often the most dangerous. El Valor de la Verdad faced no legal consequences for its role in the tragedy. The network successfully argued that they bore no responsibility for Diego's actions, that adults were capable of making their own decisions about participation. But the show's format evolved. Questions became less invasive. Psychological support was offered to contestants. The atmosphere became more supportive, less exploitative. The fundamental premise remained unchanged, though. People willing to reveal their secrets for money. Families willing to hear uncomfortable truths for entertainment. The show continued because there was always another Camila, another young person convinced that honesty would set them free, another family willing to sit in a studio audience and watch their loved one confess their deepest shames. 1 year after the trial ended, a new contestant sat behind the curved desk, a young woman from a small town, eager to win money for her family's medical bills, ready to answer any question for the right price. In the audience, her boyfriend watched nervously. He had no idea what secrets she might reveal, what truths might destroy their relationship. The host smiled warmly and opened his note cards. The cameras rolled. The polygraph machine hummed to life. Another girl, another truth, another silence waiting to shatter. Somewhere in a maximum security prison, Diego Leon watched the episode on the common room television. He showed no emotion, as another contestant chose truth over safety. But prison guards noticed that his hands still clenched into fists whenever a female contestant took the stage. In their small house across the city, Mr. and Mrs. Ramos sat in silence. The television was off. The radio was silent. They existed in a world without media, without entertainment, without the constant noise that had consumed their daughter. On the kitchen table, next to the photograph from Camila's high school graduation, sat an unopened letter from the prison system. Diego Leon was requesting a meeting with his victim's family. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to seek forgiveness. The letter had arrived weeks earlier. Neither parent had opened it fully. They had read enough to understand its purpose, then set it aside. Forgiveness was not something they were prepared to consider. Explanation was not something they needed to hear. Their daughter had told the truth on television and died for it. That was explanation enough. Outside their window, the neighborhood continued its daily rhythm. Children walked to school, vendors called out their wares. Life moved forward because it had no choice. But inside the house where Camila Ramos had grown up, time had stopped the moment she decided to be honest about who she was. The truth had set her free, just not in the way anyone had hoped. In a world that demands authenticity, Camila Ramos discovered that some truths carry a price no one should have to pay. Her story forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. When honesty becomes dangerous, what does that say about the society we've built around us? If this case left you questioning the cost of truth-telling, share what haunts you most in the comments below, and let us know if you think Camila's choice was brave or tragic. Subscribe to Crime Fictional for more stories that explore the dark spaces where human nature reveals its most unsettling truths.